Lee Keegan is with us. Lee, good morning to you. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Yeah, good. I mentioned the GPS free there. You must have been very, very impressed by what Comerford was doing at the weekend. It was shithousery on a level that we hadn't seen since you threw that GPS.
Yeah, he was involved in a couple of incidents over the weekend. So he was setting a different trend from back in 17. So fair play to him.
Here's the thing, right? Everybody afterwards was saying, "Oh, it was played in a great spirit." But I think if Dublin had won that match, there'd be a much bigger focus from particularly my Kerry friends here on the 10 minutes in the sin bin where actually the ball was in play for about a minute and a half. It felt like.
Yeah, definitely. And
the penalty.
The goal camera doesn't help Comerford in any way or shape. The fact that we've all seen it after the game, so. Do you know what? It's part of the game, though. All the top teams do it, Jared, to be honest. It's not nice, but I mean, in the context of that game, I suppose Dublin were probably hanging on at that stage. It was early in the game, but I felt like the penalty was nearly like a wake-up call for them. And, probably fair dues to Comfort. Not obviously the right thing to be at in terms of the context of sport and what it's about, but I mean, it killed time for Dublin to get themselves kind of reassessed, and as a result, they kind of grew into the game and they kind of died with their roots on, to be honest. It just seemed to ignite them after that penalty miss, to be honest. And I felt if the penalty went in from Sheahan, actually the game felt over at that stage. I just didn't see a way back because the momentum was with Kerry. But Comfort definitely played. He played plenty of time on the ground, yeah.
Yeah, and then there's the minor melee afterwards, where it just felt like he was operating at a level where he knew exactly what he needed to do for his team. Which, to be honest, in the last 5 minutes of the game, it seemed to desert Dublin a little bit. Like when they kicked the equaliser, I expected them to do pretty much what they did to you guys, which was like wrestle everybody to the ground to make sure that there's nothing here except maybe the goalkeeper has to go long again. And
it's pretty obvious why they didn't do that, because Dublin felt they could get that kick out and they felt they could go and win the game from there. If they were a point up, they would have done that.
But they didn't do a good job of trying to get it back.
Or did Kerry just do a good job of getting it out? Maybe.
Well, both. Yeah, I'm interested in what you think of that, Lee, because it felt like not that they switched off, but that they didn't manage that last minute and a half of the game as well as you might have expected them to.
No, and that's probably been something that's it's been associated with Dublin over the previous year, especially during the time we played them in regular games, that Dublin's kind of game management, that was their biggest asset they had, and especially against the top teams, in particular against ourselves in finals and semis, that just knew how to run in that clock. And I suppose that incident happened maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we wouldn't be discussing about Dublin not stopping that. Dublin would have stopped that, and the game would have been over nearly. But it just feels like since kind of the old guard have left Dublin and the new guard have come in, they don't seem to kind of recognise that. Albeit they still have James McCarthy, Kieran Kenny, Brian Fenton, who've been part of those teams, but the newer generation probably are not as clued into what the older guys did before in terms of game management, killing the game. And probably even if you compare Dublin from previous years to even this year, like their shots, the shot conversion was very low at the last day, and even some of their turnovers that you wouldn't associate Dublin with. And that's kind of the difference probably from the Dublin greats to the Dublin team now. But listen, just all things aside, like, so you have to still give credit to Dublin. I mean, that game could have slipped away easily and they could have just, let that game run out. But it's just a sign of a great team. And you have the likes of James McCarthy in particular and Kieran Kelly. You just couldn't ask for any more of those guys. I mean, they've done it all in the game. They've won everything. It could have been just an easy thing for them to say, you know what, the game is over. But the boys stuck to their guns, and they put in one of the best shifts I've seen in a long time in Dublin forwards.
The second half of that game on Sunday was mad, and the game lost all shape. Kerry lost complete structure if they had one in that second half. Like, the closest kind of thing I can remember is your final against the Dubs in 17. Maybe after you scored that goal into the hill, just the place absolutely hopping. You just don't know what's going to happen next. What is it like in that moment, Lee, when you realise that the whole game has fallen to pieces and that there is no structure to it anymore?
I think, to be honest, Colin Boyle texted me actually just for the game. He said this game is going to be absolute madness, carnage. And I suppose the first half always takes a bit of shape and context, but the second half, I don't know, you couldn't write it, to be honest, because there's bodies everywhere. Like Kerry, I never seen so many boys go down with cramp or injuries, and I don't know who was marking who, and it was just madness altogether. And I think that's the thing with these big games, especially in the semi-final, and we ourselves know it particularly more than most, is that sometimes it's within the madness sometimes is where games are won. And to be fair, it probably will be a good thing for Kerry that it happened now rather than the final, I think, because now they've got that out of their system, that madness, that whole carnage around the Dublin, beating Dublin for so long. So I think that's a huge positive for them. But a game like that just takes on a life of its own. It really does. I mean, in the mix of Croke Park in the semi-final, and there's 20 minutes go, and you to be honest, you don't know what's going to happen. And I'd say it's the same playing out there as well. Sometimes you just don't know what's going to happen next. I mean, if you banked on James McCarthy near that point, it would tend to go. I mean, that was just absolutely crazy stuff. Like, I mean, that was outrageous game. Like, I mean, take on that shot as well. I mean, I never seen a cleaner strike, and that added to the more carnage of the game, because once he got that, like, momentum was shifted completely back to Dublin, and like I would have backed Dublin all day to win that game from that point onwards. So I mean, you have to give credit to him, but then again, listen, Kerry won the game, and that's what it's all about. Semi-finals are there for winning. I think Jack O'Connor made a very good point there after the game. He goes, "We're going to the final. No one's going to remember the semi-final if we don't go on and be going in the final." So I think that's the biggest key factor for Kerry now, is how quickly can they get back grounded, get back training, get back into their own bubble, and listen, take the negatives, take the positives from Sunday, because there's loads of them. There is really, they were hanging on towards the end. It probably should never got to the point where it came down to last minute free. If Kerry were really on song for that game, they could have walked that game at times, but because they let Dublin get back into it and let Dublin dictate what they want to do, I think that's going to be a big focus now for Kerry going into the Galway game in 2 weeks' time.
So the last 3 times Dublin have been beaten in the championship, the team that beat them went on to lose the final. Obviously yourselves in 2 occasions, and in the middle Donegal in 2014. Off that high they get done in the final. Even just from last year, Lee, because I guess beating Dublin was just such a huge moment for everybody in the country to see them beaten. Is that a real thing going into the final, trying to come off that? And I think was it a 2-week gap as well last year? Like, I feel it was the same gap, or maybe a little bit longer. But
I think we had 3 last year.
Right,
it was based on Tyrone and at the game, and Tyrone Kerry took an extra week with COVID and bits and pieces like that. So, but it's a weird one, because we got grounded pretty quick after the Dublin game. To be honest, like, it wasn't a big thing of a celebration. I think we had a couple of quiet drinks that night together as a group, and we were back kind of training on the Tuesday. So it was very much sole focus on. Like, I suppose we didn't know at that stage. The following week was kind of just we get recovery and get back to our training facility and stuff like that. But once Tyrone came around, there was no more talk with them, to be brutally honest. I think there was more talk probably media wise than there was in our group. And once we knew it was Tyrone, that was the focus, to be totally honest with you. But obviously, listen, beat Dublin Championship in a big game is huge for any team. But I suppose from my own experience, and even particularly last year, and it was kind of fresh still, it was Tyrone. That's all we focus on. Didn't matter. Like, we're talking about Dublin and Tyrone, two totally different teams, how they set up, how they play, different matchups. So for us, it was just trying to get into that mindset of we're going to play a really tough Ulster team, and unfortunately we just didn't do enough to do that. So I mean, Kerry might learn from that from last year ourselves, but I don't know what the learning is, because I just think we just got beaten by other team on the day, to be totally honest. So but I do think there's something a bit different with this Kerry team. They're on the road since 18 now. I think, a lot of people talk about the young ones there, but like, you gotta realise Clifford and O'Shea, these boys are 5 years into their senior championship career or senior career. Like, so I mean, I think probably that's the huge stepping stone, that the last day against Sunday to beat Dublin. But I think the biggest thing for Kerry now is how quickly can they get grounded. I think with someone like Jack Connor taking over them, I think he'll get the best out of this week now. I mean, there's not going to be much to be done for the final. Like, this week is going to be recovery, get the injuries sorted, literally do a couple of days analysis, and that's really it. So I mean, Jack's a smart man. I mean, he knows the game better than most, so he'll have Kerry primed for 2 weeks' time, and it won't be a concern, I don't think, this Dublin game.
Gavin White looked like he was injured.
That doesn't look good.
Yeah,
that doesn't look good. Yeah.
Do they have enough strength and depth? Are they strong enough in the half back line to be able to create like they might need to do against a Galway team who, from the semi-final and from what they've done, will probably be very happy to sit in with lots of bodies, certainly in that first 15, 20, 25, 35 minutes?
I suppose, like, a lot of talk on Kerry is they're probably attacking kind of bench options. I think it's probably like, Gavin White's a huge loss. I mean, now I thought he probably was in out of the game the last bit. I suppose in the goal didn't go in for himself, and then the penalty miss, he didn't probably have one of his better games. But in terms of, I mean, his leadership for Kerry, I think he's going to be a huge loss. And the reason he will be as well is that he's one of the probably young guys I can see run as quick as the likes of Jack McCaffrey or Shane Welsh. So to break that line, especially a goal to set up, I think that's going to be a huge loss for Kerry. And how to replace that, I'm not sure, to be honest. I don't think it'll matter from a defensive context point of view because, as you said, Galway set up with massive numbers behind the ball. So I don't think that's going to hinder us defensively. But I think more from an attacking platform from deep, Galway brings so much positivity to the Kerry attack from deep. And even if he makes a run, he might get the ball, but he creates space with like Clifford, Shawley, Stephen O'Brien. So I mean, he's going to be a huge loss. But that's probably the biggest thing. Just looking at the goal again the last day was. Like Galway are very happy to stick to that game plan for the full 70 minutes. They might tweak a little bit with Kerry, might go a bit more at them, but they're very comfortable dropping big numbers back and leaving one or two up top. So I think, based on what Kerry was saying last day, they should set up right for that. But it's going to be a hard game to call, to be honest. I kind of listened to their own. Galway are kind of, no one probably tipped Galway to be this far, but they'll see this as a one-off game. All the talk about Kerry now going into 2 weeks' time. So I mean, poor choice again has been there. He knows the routine. So he'll have them prime now for 2 weeks' time, regardless if Galway's playing or not, to be honest, which he probably won't be.
Do you think they've got better since the kind of championship game that you lost to them?
To be honest, it's very hard to know because, like, if you take Galway in the first half against Derry, I honestly feel if that was Dublin or Kerry last day, that game wouldn't even got past half time. So that's probably the biggest worry for Galway. They looked very nervy in that first half, to be honest. And to be honest, once they got ahead Derry, I did feel Galway were going to win the last against Derry. I just think they have too much flair up top, too much quality, like Shane Welch, Comer, Killian McGlade, these boys. I just think they have a better attacking unit. So I was worried after 10 minutes. I thought, look at Derry, if they get ahead at all, they're very good at killing the game. But to fair to Galway, when they came out after half time, I do think that 45 was huge for Galway going into half time because they played so poorly. And the fact that was a big momentum changer, even for Shane Welch, he was out of the game completely in the first half, and Eoin Kluski did a fantastic job throughout the game. But even Welch's demeanour coming out after half time was totally different. Took those 3 frees, looked like a new man. So I think they probably have, you can't write off Galway anyway because they've beaten 2 really top quality Ulster teams. So I mean that's not easy done, and they're fully unmerited in all their fight because they've beaten a good Armagh team who were hotly tipped to be Galway. And they beat a Derry team who were ranked really high after a big win against Kerry and their Ulster campaign. So Galway will be full of confidence, to be honest, with this game. And they seem to have a clean bit of health as well going into it. And a lot of their big guys are playing good football. Damien Comer's hit the right notes at the right time. He's going to take a lot of minding. Shane Welch can definitely improve more, which I think he is going for the final. Rob Brindley was quite the last day, a guy I identified as a big guy for them, but he'll have to step up for the final. So I think Galway will be really excited for this game. Like I said, and the extra 24 hours watching the Dublin Kerry game, they have a lot going into that final. So I mean, they're not going to fear. As I said, when you beat 2 good sides, I mean, you should be full of confidence as well.
Is there anything in that second half that Kerry can point to as an explainer for what happened from a game that they had largely control of, particularly in the second quarter of the first half, that they can fix in advance of an All-Ireland final? Or do they just have to accept that at some point Galway are going to have a purple patch and just ride it out, hope they don't score enough, and we try and outscore them?
Yeah, I think if it gets into a game like that, I just think Kerry are too good. So if you're going to shoot out, you can't leave Clifford and Sean Shane, these boys, in open space and going to a shootout. So absolutely, Galway are going to get per patch in this game. It's just how good Kerry, and we've seen how good Kerry are defensively. I mean, conceding 113 last day is not bad, to be honest. 14 scores. If you're conceding that, you're going to win most games anyway. And with Kerry's attacking unit, they're going to score more than 14 scores anyway. So I mean, that would be a positive. My biggest concern probably for Kerry is the structure. As Eoin mentioned earlier, it got to pandemonium stages in the second half, and probably haven't associated that Kerry up to that game now. They've been very structured, very solid, and kept very rigid to their game plan. So, and my other probably worry a bit for Kerry was the amount of energy they expanded in that first half to try and take on Dublin, and I really think it impacted them in the second half. It could have been the heat. I don't know. But a lot of their guys looked dead in their feet halfway through that second half. And again, Galway identified that, and the way their running game is going at the moment, that could be a huge area of concern for Jack going into the final. So, I mean, a lot of guys expanded huge amount of energy, and even the likes of Clifford and Sean Shea, who had massive first halves, went out the game second half completely. So Galway see that again as a huge positive for themselves to take out. So if they can negate those 2 lads in the second half, albeit Paddy Clifford came really good in the second half, I think it's a huge focus for Kerry going in, but it will also be a big focus for Galway. Can they run the legs of these boys in the second half after what they've seen against Dublin? Now it's going to take a massive effort, don't get me wrong. The Dublin Kerry game was high intensity, took a lot of effort, but I mean, it's probably a concern for Jack that how many lads lost structure, but also how many guys went down kind of cramp and fatigue early enough in the game.
Yeah, definitely. Like the one thing is that in the middle of all that pandemonium, as you say, Kerry were still really good defensively. Like some of the turnovers were really impressive. Like the Costello goal was before the pandemonium set in. Like they didn't crumble at the back. It was just they were just so disjointed in attack.
Yeah, and that's something I suppose probably even we identified with Kerry over the years up till now was if you can get a bit ahead of Kerry at all, and even that goal, and Jim McCarthy's pointed out earlier, I would have seen that as a huge plus for the team attacking Kerry, because we've seen Kerry in the year before, even against Tyrone last year, that come down that stretch and you're still within the game, you'd feel pretty confident you're going to take these boys. Where I feel this year, even ourselves in the third quarter, we got to a point what killed us was probably the few wides and the drop short balls, but even looking at Kerry, they never really panicked. They tagged on the next 4 or 5 scores after that, and they just looked pretty comfortable. So even defensively, it was always probably one of our big game plans is to take these boys on. Now they look really, really solid, and that's huge credit to Paddy Talley and the way he's them set up. But they actually look really confident as defenders now at the moment, because they're working hard for each other. It's not a thing where it's man on man. They're actually trusting that system. So one guy gets beat, there's another guy backing them up. So I think that's huge confidence and huge applause that's go to the likes of Paddy Talley that he's done that job with them. And that's a huge transformation from last year, what they conceded goals compared to now. I think it's something like 7 last year, and they've only conceded 1 in championship this year. So that speaks volumes with their defensive plan already. So yeah, so I mean it's going to make for good reading in 2 weeks. Can the Galway attack take that on?
Look, it'll be very interesting to see. One last thing, right? Hawkeye, I don't know. Do we feel confident that they switch it back on for the hurling this week and it goes fine, that's it and we're back? Or is it just like, look, well, let's take the off season to see what's going on and make sure that the pointy-headed boffins at the company come back and prove that it's accurate?
Someone said in the video last day, it's Hawkeye is like human, makes more mistakes than anything else. So I mean, it doesn't really give you much confidence that that's coming out. And to be honest, it's crazy. Like this day and age that we don't have technology at the elite sports level that can be trusted. I mean, it's a very simple concept. If the ball goes over the bar, it gives a score. Like I mean, I think Conor Glass had one. Suppose he went over the bar as well, and Hawkeye gave it off, and it looked good for our angle in the studio last day. Like so, I mean. It doesn't bode well for our games, and it looked messy even at half time. All the officials are talking about this, and even for ourselves, it's all we talked about half time. We weren't talking about the game, right? There was all Hawkeye, so it's taken away from the games and the spectacle. Albeit the spectacle wasn't so good in the first half of the Derry Goal game, but still, it shouldn't be the hot topic conversation that we're talking about Hawkeye again. I mean, it's come up a few times over the last few years. It's going to be have to look at. So if I were the hurling bosses going into the game, I wouldn't have a lot of faith in it, to be honest. If they couldn't give a score for a bigger ball, how are they going to handle a smaller ball? That would be my worry. So it's a bit mad. I don't, to be honest, like one of Sean O'Shea's point last day had drifted a bit over the post, and we know Hawkeye what was going to happen in that case. Do you know? So these are the big questions we're going to have to ask. Is it fit for purpose? I'm not sure at the moment. They're going to have to review that in depth, because it's not really good enough in this day and age that we can't trust a system that's meant to help our sports and help dictate games.
Yeah, 100%. Lee, great stuff. Thanks a million for joining us this morning. Cheers
guys. Thank you very much. Take care.
It's always interesting stuff from Lee Keegan there this morning at 9 minutes past 9. Ireland have kicked another penalty. Caring for